I had just donated blood to save my mother-in-law. My body was still cold. My arm still ached from the IV needle, but I still believed my husband would walk in and thank me. Instead, he walked in with his mistress. She looked at me lying on the hospital bed as if I were a piece of furniture about to be thrown away. Then he placed the divorce papers on my stomach and coldly said, "You're just something my mother needs. Don't confuse that with belonging to my house." I said nothing. I just watched them leave. Because in 30 minutes, he would realize that he had just thrown away the only thing that could have saved his life. Before we go further, thank you for being here. It genuinely means something. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from, your city, your country. I want to know who's in this with me. This story contains fictional elements shaped for storytelling and educational purposes. Any resemblance to names or places is coincidental, but the message inside it is something worth keeping. The first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes was the ceiling. It was not the smooth white plaster of the private suite Prescott had promised me. It was gray, uneven, with a long water stain running diagonally from the light fixture to the corner. A fluorescent bulb buzzed faintly above me. Somewhere behind the curtain to my left, a machine beeped in slow, patient intervals. I tried to move my right arm. A dull pull stopped me. The IV line taped to the inside of my elbow caught the light when I lifted my hand slightly, and I let it drop again. My whole left side felt hollowed out tender, in a way that made even breathing deliberate. 4 days. That was how long I had been in this bed. 4 days of institutional food on plastic trays of nurses whose names I never caught, of waiting for Prescott to walk through that door the way he had promised he would. He had kissed me at the doors of the operating room. I remembered the way his hands had held my face warm and careful, the way a man holds something he loves. He had said my name twice. He had said he would be the first face I saw when I woke up. I had believed him. The door opened. Prescott walked in first. He was wearing the navy suit he reserved for important meetings, the one with the faint chalk stripe that his tailor in Midtown had made for him last spring. His hair was combed back. He looked rested. I realized with a slowness that had nothing to do with the medication still working through my system, exactly like a man who had slept well. Behind him came a woman I had never seen before. She was tall with the kind of deliberate elegance that takes years to construct. Her dress was the deep red of a wound that has not yet decided whether it will close. She walked into my hospital room the way people walk into rooms they have already decided belong to them, and she did not look at me with curiosity or discomfort. She looked at me the way you look at furniture you are about to have removed. Her name, I would learn in a few minutes, was Delphine. She had been with Prescott since before I existed in his life. Prescott stopped at the foot of my bed. He did not ask how I was feeling. He did not look at the IV line or the monitors or the pallor of my skin that the nurse had mentioned that morning with a small frown. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and withdrew a folded envelope thick with papers, and he placed it on my stomach with the careful precision of a man completing a transaction. The weight of it pressed against the gauze bandaging on my left side, and I made a sound I did not mean to make. He did not flinch. I opened the envelope with fingers that did not feel entirely like my own. The document inside was printed on heavy legal paper, the kind that New York law firms use when they want you to understand the seriousness of what you are holding. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Filed 3 days ago. The day I had been on the operating table. Behind Prescott, the door opened again. An orderly pushed a wheelchair into the room. In the wheelchair sat Lavinia Sterling Prescott's mother, wrapped in a cashmere shawl the color of winter fog. She was the reason I was lying in this bed. She was the reason I had agreed to let a surgeon remove a portion of my own blood from my body while I was unconscious and unable to change my mind. She looked at me and smiled. It was not a kind smile. "You did exactly what we needed you to do," Prescott said. His voice was the same voice he had used at dinner tables and in doorways, and in the dark of our bedroom for 4 years. Measured, controlled. The voice of a man who had never once lost track of what he wanted. "I should have been clearer with you from the beginning. I found you because of your blood type, Rh null. It is the rarest blood type in the world. Fewer than 50 people are known to carry it. My mother's condition required a direct donor match during treatment. and you were the only viable option within a practical distance. I stared at him. The marriage served its purpose, he continued. You had access to good medical care, a comfortable home, financial stability. I kept my end of the arrangement even if you did not know the terms. Now the arrangement is complete. Delphine moved to the single chair in the corner of the room and sat down, crossing her legs at the ankle. She did not appear bored exactly. She appeared patient in the way that people are patient when they have won and are simply waiting for the other person to finish processing it. Lavinia's voice when she spoke was stronger than I expected from a woman who had been ill for months. You were a useful girl, I will give you that. But women like you do not belong in houses like ours. You never did. You were a solution to a problem. The problem is solved. Prescott reached into his jacket again and produced a check. He set it on the bedside table next to the water pitcher. $15,000 made out to my name in his handwriting. $15,000 for 4 years. $15,000 for the portion of myself I had given to a woman who had never once called me by my first name without making it sound like an insult. Sign the divorce papers without contesting, he said. The check covers your immediate expenses. You will vacate the apartment within 30 days of your discharge. I looked at the check. I looked at the divorce papers on my lap. I looked at Lavinia in her wheelchair with her small, satisfied smile, and at Delphine in her red dress examining her fingernails, and I felt something happen inside my chest that was not grief and was not anger. It was something quieter and more final than either of those things. It was the particular silence that falls when the last version of a story you have been telling yourself simply stops being possible. You should go, I said. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. Prescott picked up his jacket lapels slightly, a habit he had when he considered a matter closed. He turned toward the door. Delphine rose from the chair. The orderly began to turn Lavinia's wheelchair. Prescott's hand reached the door handle. From the other side of the door, a hand pressed flat against it and held it shut. A voice came through the gap, even and cold, as January air off the Hudson River. I am going to need everyone in this room who is not my patient to step back from that door right now. Nobody in that room moved. Prescott's hand was still on the door handle. Delphine had risen halfway from the chair. The orderly gripping Lavinia's wheelchair had gone very still, the way people go still when they sense that the authority in a room has just shifted to someone they have not yet seen. The door opened inward. The man who stepped through it was in his mid-40s with the kind of unhurried physicality that belongs to people who have spent years making fast decisions in small spaces. He wore a white coat over a gray shirt, a stethoscope looped around his neck, and he carried a patient chart that he did not appear to need. His eyes moved across the room in the efficient way of someone conducting a rapid assessment, touching the monitors, the IV stand my face, and then settling on Prescott with an expression that was not quite anger, but was considerably worse than disapproval. His name was Dr. Weston. He was the attending physician responsible for my post-operative care, which meant that in this particular room, at this particular moment, he outranked everyone present, including a man whose family name was on 2 buildings in Midtown Manhattan. Mr. Sterling, he said. He did not phrase it as a question. Prescott straightened slightly. Doctor, we were just finishing up a private family matter. We were on our way out. You were, Dr. Weston said. 4 days post-nephrectomy, my patient's blood pressure just spiked 14 points in under 3 minutes. That tells me that whatever family matter you were conducting in here was not a conversation she was well enough to be having. He stepped fully into the room and held the door open. I need everyone who is not a patient to leave. Now. That includes you, the woman by the chair, and whoever is operating that wheelchair. Prescott did not move immediately. There was a beat, the particular beat of a man deciding whether the ground beneath him is solid enough to push back on, and then he apparently decided it was not. He adjusted his jacket. He looked at me once more, a flat and final look, the kind you give a room you are leaving for the last time and have no interest in remembering. Think carefully about those papers, he said. Then he walked out. Delphine followed without a word, her heels making the only sound in the corridor outside. The orderly turned Lavinia's wheelchair and maneuvered it through the door. Lavinia did not look at me again. She stared straight ahead as she was wheeled out, and I was grateful for that because I did not think I could have held my expression together under the weight of one more thing from her tonight. Dr. Weston closed the door. The room was suddenly very quiet. The machine behind the curtain continued its patient beeping. Outside, I could hear rain beginning against the window, soft and persistent, the kind of January rain that cannot decide whether it wants to be sleet. Dr. Weston came to the side of my bed and checked the monitor without comment. He adjusted something on the IV line. He picked up the divorce papers that had slid off my lap onto the blanket, set them on the bedside table without looking at them, and pulled the chair closer to the bed. He sat down. He did not immediately speak, and I did not ask him to. There are moments when the kindest thing another person can do is simply occupy the same space without requiring you to perform being all right. After a while, he said, "How is your pain level?" "Manageable," I said. He nodded. He looked at the monitor again. Then he looked at me with the directness of a man who has learned that people in hospitals generally prefer honesty to comfort when the two are in conflict. "There is something you need to know about the surgery," he said. "About what happened during the procedure." I waited. Presbyterian was operating under mass casualty protocols that night. There had been a gas explosion 4 blocks north. Every available staff member was pulled into triage, including several who were mid-procedure elsewhere. In your case, a first-year resident named Faye was assisting with the blood transfer portion of the donation. She was working her third consecutive shift. He paused. In the confusion of that night, she connected the transfer line incorrectly. I did not understand immediately. Connected it incorrectly to what? "The blood you donated did not go to Lavinia Sterling," Dr. Weston said. The line was routed to the patient in the adjacent room, a man who had been brought in from the same explosion site with acute hemorrhagic shock and a matching Rh null compatibility profile. Without that transfusion, he would not have survived the night. The beeping of the machine filled the silence between us. "Lavinia Sterling received the hospital's last unit of stored Rh null blood," Dr. Weston continued. "It was the only unit we had in reserve. It was enough to stabilize her through the immediate crisis, but it was not the direct donation her son had arranged." He said the word "arranged" with a careful flatness that told me he knew exactly what kind of arranging had taken place. "The man in the adjacent room is alive because of you. He has asked to know who his donor was, which is his right under the hospital's disclosure protocol once the donor consents." I looked at the ceiling. The water stain ran from the light fixture to the corner, the same as it had when I woke up, the same as it would tomorrow. The world had just rearranged itself around me in a way I could not yet measure, and the ceiling was still exactly the same. "Who is he?" I asked. Dr. Weston told me the name. I had heard it before, the way everyone in New York had heard it in the context of buildings and foundations, and the kind of philanthropy that gets its own wing named after it. Conrad Montgomery, the founder of Montgomery Group. A man whose face appeared occasionally in the business section of the Times, usually in connection with something being built or endowed or restored. A man whose name until 30 seconds ago had existed in my mind in the same general category as weather patterns and stock market indexes. Things that shaped the world I lived in without ever touching it directly. A quiet knock at the door. Dr. Weston rose and opened it. The man who entered was somewhere in his 60s with silver hair cut close and the bearing of someone who had spent decades being useful to powerful people without ever needing to announce it. He carried a small arrangement of white flowers in one hand and a cream-colored envelope in the other. The envelope was sealed with a pressed wax emblem, a letter M, inside a simple geometric border. "Forgive the hour," he said. His voice was quiet and precise. "My name is Graves. I serve as Mr. Conrad Montgomery's personal representative. Mr. Montgomery asked me to deliver this personally." He set the flowers on the windowsill and placed the envelope on the bedside table beside the water pitcher at a careful distance from the divorce papers. "He asks only that you read it tonight if you are able. There is no obligation of any kind attached." He gave a small formal nod to Dr. Weston, a smaller one in my direction, and withdrew. The door closed again. I looked at the envelope on the table. The wax seal caught the light from the fluorescent bulb above dull gold against cream paper. Outside, the rain was heavier now, running in thin streams down the window glass, and the city beyond it was a smear of orange and white, indifferent and enormous, and entirely unchanged by anything that had happened in this room tonight. I reached out and picked up the envelope. The paper was heavier than ordinary stationery, the kind that costs enough to be noticed. My name was written on the front in a hand that pressed firmly into the page, the handwriting of someone accustomed to being taken at their word. Graves and Dr. Weston left within minutes of each other, and the room settled back into the particular quiet of a hospital at night, that specific stillness made of low machinery sounds and distant corridor voices, and the awareness that somewhere nearby, other people are fighting for things you cannot see. I was alone for the first time since waking up. Not the alone of lying in a bed waiting for someone who would not come. A different kind. The kind that has no expectations attached to it, that simply is what it is, empty and honest and asking nothing. I held the envelope in my lap without opening it for a long time. The wax seal pressed faintly against my palm. Outside, the rain had softened to something barely audible, just a presence against the glass rather than a sound. The divorce papers were still on the bedside table where Dr. Weston had set them. I did not look at them. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope, deliberate and unhurried, the kind of script that belongs to someone who learned to write before keyboards made penmanship optional. The paper carried a faint scent, something like cedar, and something like old books, and I noticed this in the strange heightened way you notice small things when larger ones have temporarily overwhelmed your capacity to process them. The letter was not long. Conrad Montgomery wrote that he had been told through the hospital's disclosure process that a young woman had been the source of the blood transfusion that had kept him alive on the night of January 9th. He wrote that he understood she might have reasons not to respond, and that he would respect that entirely. He wrote that he had known in the particular way that people who come very close to dying sometimes know things, that something had shifted in the room when the transfusion began, that the quality of the night had changed, and that he had wanted ever since waking up to find a way to acknowledge the person responsible for that shift. He did not ask for anything. He did not offer anything. He said only that if she was willing, he would like very much to meet her. That Graves would return in the morning and would convey her answer either way, and that either answer would be entirely acceptable. He signed it with his full name and nothing else. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully along its original creases and set it on the blanket beside me. And I looked at the ceiling for a while, at the water stain I had memorized by now, without meaning to. And I thought about what it meant, that a man whose name was on buildings had written me a letter by hand on heavy paper in a hospital room 2 floors above where I was lying. I thought about Prescott's face at the foot of my bed. I thought about the check on the table. I thought about the word arranged and the flat way Dr. Weston had said it, and what it meant that the person who had come closest to genuine kindness since I woke up was a man I had never met, whose blood I now shared in some technical sense. At some point I slept. When I woke, thin gray light was coming through the window. The rain had stopped. The city outside was doing what it always did, moving and indifferent, and for a moment before I was fully awake, I did not remember any of it, and that moment was the best part of the morning. Graves arrived at 7:45. He knocked twice before entering, which I noticed because Prescott had never knocked on a door in the 4 years I had known him. He was dressed the same as the night before, dark jacket, no tie, the quiet self-presentation of a man whose job is to be helpful without being visible. He carried nothing this time except himself. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you were able to rest." "Some," I said. He did not ask about the letter directly. He stood near the door with his hands at his sides and waited, which I understood was his way of giving me the question without imposing it. "I read it," I said. He nodded. "Tell me something," I said. "Why did he send you specifically? He could have had the hospital pass a message." Graves considered this with the seriousness it apparently deserved. "Mr. Montgomery does not send messages through intermediaries for matters he considers personal," he said. He felt this was personal. I looked at him for a moment. He had the face of a man who kept a great many things carefully in order and found satisfaction in that arrangement. There was nothing in his expression that was performing anything. I was about to tell him I would think about it when his eyes moved briefly and involuntarily to my left wrist. It was a small movement, the kind you make when you see something unexpected and your training almost but not quite catches it in time. His gaze dropped to the thin bracelet I wore, the one I had worn so long and so consistently that I no longer noticed it, except in moments like this, when someone else's noticing made it visible again. The bracelet was simple, a narrow band of silver with a small engraved detail on the inner face, a pattern I had never been able to identify precisely, but that had always seemed to me more like a signature than a decoration. I had been wearing it since the day I arrived at the group home in Brooklyn at 7 years old, already on my wrist, when the intake worker processed my paperwork, and no one had ever been able to tell me where it had come from. Graves looked away from it quickly. He looked back at my face. Something in his expression had shifted in a way that I could register but not yet read, like a word in a language you are still learning. "I'll go," I said. His voice, when he responded, was the same measured tone as before, but something underneath it had changed, register very slightly the way a room changes when a window is opened somewhere you cannot see. "I will let Mr. Montgomery know. Rupert will collect you whenever you are ready for discharge. There is no rush whatsoever." He moved toward the door. The morning check brought Dr. Weston at 8:15, chart in hand, the same focused efficiency as the night before, except that the fluorescent buzz was less oppressive in daylight. He ran through the standard assessments, asked about pain levels, noted something in the chart. Before he left, he paused at the door, looking at me in the way that people look at you when they have a question that is not quite medical. "Are you going to go meet him?" he asked. I looked past him at the window. The sky over Washington Heights was the particular pale gray of a New York January morning that has not yet decided what it wants to be. Somewhere out there, Prescott was in the apartment we had shared for 3 years, or at his office, or anywhere at all, going about the day, with the easy conscience of a man who had done what he set out to do. "I don't know what I'm walking into," I said, "but I don't think I have anything left to lose." Dr. Weston looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded once in the way of someone who finds that answer both honest and sufficient, and walked out. The man waiting outside the hospital entrance was not what I expected. I had imagined, without thinking much about it, someone in a dark uniform with a professional blankness about them, the kind of driver that wealthy people employ to be present without being noticed. Rupert was in his 60s, with a broad, weathered face, and the bearing of a man who had spent a long time being useful and had made peace with what that required. He held a small card with my name written on it, in the same precise hand as the envelope, and when he saw me come through the doors, he folded it and put it in his coat pocket without ceremony. "Miss Marin," he said, "I hope the morning treated you well." He took my bag before I could say anything about it, and he held the rear door of the black sedan open with the practiced ease of someone for whom this was not a performance, but simply a way of being. The car was warm. The seats were leather that had been cared for a long time. There was a bottle of water in the console beside me, and a small white bag from a bakery on the Upper West Side that I recognized and had not been to since before the money in my life became someone else's. I did not ask how he knew. Rupert drove north through Manhattan and then east, merging onto the Merritt Parkway, somewhere past the city line where the highway narrowed between the old stone bridges that made it look like a road from a different century. The trees on either side were bare and gray against a sky that could not commit to any particular weather. Snow lay in shallow drifts along the shoulders, not fresh enough to be clean, but not old enough to be entirely gray. He did not speak unless I did, which I appreciated. I ate the pastry from the white bag and drank the water and watched Connecticut arrive gradually through the window, the particular way it arrives when you come by road, as a slow accumulation of larger lots and older trees and houses set further back from the road, the landscape of people who have had enough for long enough to stop needing to be seen. After about 50 minutes, Rupert turned off the parkway onto a county road lined with stone walls, and then onto a private lane where the trees grew close enough on either side that the branches met overhead. At the end of the lane, a gate stood open. Beyond it, a gravel drive curved toward a house. I had grown up understanding wealth as something other people had. I had lived inside it briefly in Prescott's apartment in Manhattan, where everything was new and deliberate and designed to signal something. Montgomery Estate was different in a way I could not immediately name. It was large, certainly 3 stories of pale stone with dark shutters and a wide front porch that ran the length of the facade, but it did not announce itself. It sat in its landscape, the way things sit when they have been in one place long enough to stop trying. Graves met us at the front door. He took my coat and asked if I needed anything before he showed me through the house. I said I was fine. He led me through a series of rooms that were furnished with the kind of accumulated specificity that takes generations to produce. Not a decorator's idea of a house, but an actual history of a family photographs in mismatched frames books that had been read rather than arranged furniture that bore the evidence of long use without apology. There were flowers on a side table in the hall, white and winter blooming, and a clock on the mantelpiece that ticked with the unhurried authority of something that had been keeping time in this house before anyone currently alive had been born. We climbed a staircase to the second floor and moved along a corridor lined with framed photographs. I glanced at them as we walked faces across decades, formal portraits, and candid moments, the accumulation of a family that had stayed in one place and documented itself. Near the end of the corridor, Graves paused at a door that was slightly ajar. I do not know what made me look through it rather than past it. Perhaps the particular quality of the light inside, which was different from the rest of the corridor, softer coming through curtains that had not been fully opened. Perhaps the fact that Graves had slowed without stopping, as though this doorway required a different kind of passing. I pushed it open gently. The room was small and had not been used in a long time. That was the first thing you noticed, not that it was dusty or neglected exactly, but that it had been maintained with the careful stillness of a place being preserved rather than lived in. A narrow bed with a white coverlet, a low bookshelf with children's books spine out, a wooden chair in the corner, a mobile above the bed, small painted birds still in the windless air. On the wall above the bookshelf hung a portrait. It was the size you would commission for a child's room. Not a formal painting, but something warmer. A girl of about 7 rendered in oils, with the kind of attention that says this child was looked at very carefully by the person who created this. She had dark hair and eyes that were depicted with a particular quality of alertness, the eyes of a child who noticed things. She wore a light blue dress. On her left wrist was a bracelet. I went very still. The bracelet in the portrait was narrow and silver, with a small detail on the inner face. From where I stood, I could not see the engraving clearly, but the proportion was exact. The placement was exact. The way it sat on the small wrist was exactly the way mine had always sat, slightly loose, resting against the wrist bone. My hand went to my own wrist without my deciding to move it. Graves had stopped behind me. He did not speak. I stood in the doorway of a room that smelled of cedar and old paper, and something I could not name, looking at a portrait of a child I had never met wearing what appeared to be the same bracelet I had worn since I was 7 years old, and did not know why, and the house was very quiet around me, and the mobile above the bed hung motionless, and from somewhere at the far end of the corridor came the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps. Graves straightened slightly beside me. His voice when he spoke was almost inaudible. "Mr. Montgomery." The footsteps stopped. In the silence that followed before I turned around, the only sound was the old clock downstairs, marking the half-hour patient and unchanged, keeping time the way it always had in this house, indifferent to whatever was about to happen in the corridor above it. I turned around. Conrad Montgomery was taller than I had expected from the photographs I had seen of him, though he carried his height differently now than the man in those old newspaper images. He walked with a cane dark wood with a brass fitting at the top, and he moved with the careful deliberateness of someone who has recently been reminded that the body has terms and conditions. He wore a dark sweater and trousers, no tie, nothing that announced itself. His hair was silver white, and his face had the particular quality of a face that had spent a long time making hard decisions and had arrived somewhere on the other side of them. He stopped in the doorway of the corridor, perhaps 10 feet from where I stood. His eyes went to my face first, then after a moment to my wrist. Graves made a quiet sound, something below the threshold of a word, and withdrew down the corridor without being asked. I heard his footsteps recede, and then there was only the two of us, and the open door of the small room behind me, and the portrait of the girl on the wall inside it. "You found her room," Conrad said. He had said this once already from the far end of the corridor, but he said it again now as though it meant something different from up close. I didn't know it was anyone's room, I said. The door was open. He nodded slowly. He looked past me at the portrait for a moment, and something moved across his face that was not grief exactly, but was related to it the way a scar is related to the original wound. Come downstairs, he said. There is a fire in the sitting room. You should not be standing in a cold corridor after what your body has been through this week. The sitting room was at the back of the house with tall windows looking out onto a garden buried under January snow. The fire was real, not gas, and it had been burning for a while, and had reached the comfortable stage where it no longer needed attention. Two chairs had been arranged at an angle to it, close enough to benefit from the warmth, far enough apart to allow for the possibility that this was simply a conversation between people who did not know each other. Conrad lowered himself into one of the chairs with the careful economy of movement that his recovery apparently required. He set the cane against the arm. I sat in the other chair and looked at the fire for a moment, because it was easier than looking directly at him, and because the fire was doing what fires do, which is to give you somewhere to rest your eyes while you think. I was told very little about you, he said, only that you were a young woman with a rare blood type who had been present at the hospital that night for reasons connected to another patient. The attending physician handled the disclosure personally. He paused. I did not know your name until Graves wrote it on the card this morning. And now that you know it, now I know you are named Marin and that you are sitting in my house and that I am alive because of you. He said it simply without the weight of performance. I wanted to thank you in person because I did not know another way to do it that felt adequate. We talked for a while in the way that strangers talk when the circumstances that brought them together are unusual enough to bypass the ordinary preliminary distance. He asked about my work before the boutique, and I told him about the accounting degree and what it had and had not been able to do for me, and he listened with the attention of someone who was genuinely interested rather than politely waiting. He did not ask about Prescott. I did not mention him. At some point, the conversation found its way to the bracelet. It happened naturally, the way things happen when they have been building toward a surface for a while. Conrad glanced at my wrist during a pause in conversation, and I saw him do it, and he saw me see him, and we arrived at the subject without either of us having to introduce it. You have been wearing that a long time, he said. Since I was 7, I said. I came into the foster care system with it already on. Nobody knew where it came from. Nobody could tell me anything about it. He was quiet for a moment. The fire shifted a log, settling, and a brief shower of sparks rose and disappeared. Wait here, he said. He rose from the chair slowly, and with effort, and crossed to the far side of the room where a low cabinet stood against the wall beside the fireplace. He opened the upper drawer and stood for a moment looking into it, and then he removed something small and brought it back to where I sat. He placed it on the low table between our chairs. It was a bracelet, narrow silver with a small engraved detail on the inner face. The proportion was exact. The weight when I picked it up was exact. The engraving on the inner face when I turned it to the light was a pattern I recognized with the specific recognition of something you have known your entire life without ever being able to explain why. I set it down on the table beside the bracelet still on my wrist. They were identical in every way that could be measured and in several ways that could not. Conrad sat back down. He looked at the two bracelets on the table and then at me and then at the fire. They were made by a craftsman in Brooklyn, he said. A man named Aldous Webb who made jewelry privately for families who wanted something that could not be replicated. Each piece he made had a specific engraving, a signature that could be traced back to him if necessary. He paused. I had 2 made, one for myself, one for my daughter. The fire made its sounds. The snow outside the tall windows had the particular stillness of snow that has finished falling and is now simply present. She disappeared 20 years ago, Conrad said. His voice was level and careful, the voice of a man who has said a thing so many times in private that he has learned how to say it, without it taking him apart completely. In Brooklyn. She was 7 years old. We were in the car together when the accident happened. I was unconscious. When I came around, she was gone. He stopped. I have been looking for her since the day I was well enough to look. I sat with the 2 bracelets on the table between us and the fire to my left, and the snow outside, and the portrait upstairs of a girl with dark eyes and an alert expression and a narrow silver bracelet on her small wrist. My throat had closed in a way that made speech temporarily unavailable. I looked at Conrad Montgomery, and Conrad Montgomery looked at me, and neither of us said the thing that was sitting in the room with us because saying it would make it real in a way that neither of us was quite ready for yet, and because some things are large enough that they require a moment of silence before they can be approached. Outside, a thin wind moved through the bare branches of the trees in the garden, and the fire burned steadily, and the clock in the hallway marked the quarter hour with the same patience it had always had. Graves had prepared a room for me on the second floor at the opposite end of the corridor from the small room with the portrait. I did not ask whether that placement had been intentional. I suspected it had. The room was comfortable in the way that rooms are comfortable when someone who pays attention has put them together the right weight of blankets, a lamp positioned where you actually need it, a glass of water on the nightstand without being asked. I lay on top of the covers fully dressed and looked at the ceiling and did not sleep. The two bracelets were on the table downstairs where we had left them. Conrad had not reached for either one when we finally said goodnight, and neither had I. They had simply remained there side by side on the low table, which seemed right somehow. Some things need to be left in place for a while before anyone decides what to do with them. I had one memory of the night I was found. I had carried it my whole life without knowing what to do with it. A fragment too small to build anything on, too persistent to ignore. The smell of something burning rubber and something chemical underneath it. The feeling of wet pavement under my hands. A voice, adult and frightened, asking if I could stand up. And before that, or perhaps during it, the sensation of something being placed on my wrist, a small deliberate weight, and a hand closing my fingers around it briefly before letting go. That was all. That was the entire inventory of what I had from before. I had told it to social workers and therapists, and to myself in the dark on various nights over the years, and it had never amounted to anything, because there was not enough of it to amount to anything. Now I lay in a room in a house in Connecticut, and turned it over one more time, and for the first time in my life, it felt like the beginning of something rather than the end of everything I could not know. At some point, the sky outside the window began to change, the particular slow brightening of a January dawn that arrives without ceremony, and I gave up on sleep and sat in the chair by the window and watched Greenwich come back into visibility out of the dark. Pemberton arrived at 9 in the morning. He was introduced to me by Graves in the front hallway with the economy of a man who considered unnecessary words a form of inefficiency. Pemberton was Conrad's primary legal counsel and had been for over 2 decades. He was somewhere in his mid-50s with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of face that processed information quickly and stored most of its conclusions internally. He shook my hand with the firm brevity of someone who reserves warmth for situations that have earned it, and carried a leather document case that had been used long enough to show it. We sat in Conrad's study, the three of us, at a round table near the window. Pemberton opened his case and arranged several folders in a sequence that suggested he had been preparing for this conversation for longer than one morning. "I want to be direct with you," he said, looking at me. "Mr. Montgomery asked me to share what we know. You are under no obligation to hear it, and you are under no obligation to respond to any of it in any particular way." I told him to go ahead. He opened the first folder. 23 years ago, Conrad Montgomery's car had been struck from behind on a residential street in the Carroll Gardens neighborhood of Brooklyn on a November evening. The impact had been significant enough to render Conrad unconscious. His daughter, 7 years old, had been in the rear passenger seat. When emergency services arrived, Conrad was found in the vehicle. His daughter was not. A witness reported seeing a dark sedan leaving the scene at speed before the ambulance arrived. The witness had noted a partial plate number. The partial number, when run through the DMV records at the time, produced 17 possible matches. One of those matches, buried in the middle of the list, corresponded to a vehicle registered to a company whose majority shareholder at the time was a man named Gerald Sterling, Prescott's father. I did not say anything. I looked at the folder, and then at the table, and then at the window, where the snow in the garden was very bright in the morning light. Pemberton continued. The child had been brought to a community intake center in Brooklyn by a bystander who had found her on the sidewalk 2 blocks from the accident site, disoriented and unable to provide her full name. The intake center had processed her as an unaccompanied minor of unknown origin. Her admission paperwork listed her age as approximately 7, and her name as given by the intake worker who had processed her that evening, a placeholder name not her own. Under the New York Family Court Act, all foster care records for minors are sealed and inaccessible to the public without a court order or the consent of the individual after they reach adulthood. Conrad had known a child matching his daughter's description had entered the system somewhere in Brooklyn in the weeks following the accident, but without a legal name or date of birth confirmed in the sealed records. Every avenue had stopped at the same wall. "We submitted a request for expedited DNA analysis yesterday afternoon," Pemberton said. He slid a single sheet across the table toward me. "These are the preliminary results. The full confirmation will take another 48 hours, but the preliminary findings are considered reliable to a margin of error below 1%. The sheet was from a private laboratory on the Upper East Side. The language was technical and precise, and I read it twice to make sure I was understanding it correctly. Conrad sat across from me with his hands flat on the table. He had not spoken since Pemberton began. He was watching me with the careful attention of a man who has learned to be patient across a very long wait and does not want to do anything now that might disturb whatever is happening. I set the paper down. I stood up and walked to the door that opened onto the small side terrace, and I pushed it open and I stepped out into the January cold without my coat. The snow on the terrace came to my ankles. The air was sharp enough to make my eyes water immediately, which was convenient. I stood there for a while. The garden was very quiet. A bird moved in one of the bare trees along the far wall, and then was still. Behind me through the glass, I could see Conrad still sitting at the table, not moving, looking at the place where I had been. He did not come outside. He did not send Graves after me. He simply remained where he was in the room that held 20 years of searching for the person who was now standing in his snow in her socks. And he waited, because he had learned how to wait, and because this was not his moment to fill with words. After a while, I came back inside. I closed the terrace door. I stood at the table and looked at the 2 bracelets sitting together where we had left them the evening before, which Graves had apparently moved to the study at some point during the night. I looked at Conrad. I looked at Pemberton. I picked up my bracelet and put it back on my wrist. Then I walked to the door of the study and knocked twice on the frame lightly with my knuckle, which was not necessary because the door was already open, but which felt like the right gesture for what I was about to do. Conrad looked up. "I want to learn everything," I said. "All of it. Whatever it takes." I paused. "Where do we start?" Conrad opened the door wider and stepped aside. "We start with coffee," he said, "and then we start with everything else." The study became the center of the next several weeks in a way I had not anticipated. I had expected something more formal, perhaps a schedule handed to me by Pemberton tutors, arriving at appointed hours, the structured efficiency of a curriculum designed by someone who did not know me. What I got instead was Conrad himself, across a table every morning at 7:30, with 2 cups of coffee and whatever he had been reading since 5, which was always something worth arguing about. He had a method that I came to recognize over time. He would set something in front of me, a financial report, a contract, a Wall Street Journal article about a sector I knew nothing about, and he would ask me one question. Not "what do you think?" which is a question that lets you hide behind vagueness, but something specific. Why did the counterparty agree to these terms? What does this clause protect, and who does it protect it from? If you were the one who needed this deal to close, what would you have done differently? The first week I got most of it wrong. The second week I got less of it wrong. By the 4th week I had stopped apologizing for being wrong and started asking why instead, which Conrad said was the most important transition anyone could make. Graves maintained the household around us with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything. Rupert drove me into the city 3 days a week for meetings that Pemberton arranged, real meetings with real people who did not know who I was, beyond the name on the meeting request, which was how Conrad wanted it. I sat in conference rooms in Midtown and listened to people negotiate and present and deflect, and afterward in the car, Rupert would ask me what I had noticed, and I would tell him, and he would nod or not nod, and we would drive back to Greenwich in the specific comfortable silence of people who have established that they are on the same side. The physical changes happened alongside the other kind, though I paid less attention to them at the time. My hair was cut by a woman on the Upper East Side who worked by appointment only and did not make small talk. The clothes I had brought with me from the hospital were replaced gradually and without ceremony, not with anything that announced itself, but with things that fit correctly and lasted and did not require me to think about them. What changed most was something that did not have an obvious external marker. It was the quality of my attention, the way I listened in a room, the way I had begun to understand slowly, and then all at once that power is mostly a matter of information and the ability to remain calm while you are processing it. It was in the 5th week that Pemberton called me into the study alone. Conrad was in the city for a medical appointment, one of the regular follow-ups that his recovery required, and Pemberton had arrived early and arranged 3 folders on the table in the specific sequence he used when he wanted to control the order in which information landed. "I have been conducting a financial review of Prescott Sterling's holdings," he said, settling into the chair across from me with the directness that I had come to appreciate about him. Pemberton had no interest in softening things. He considered it a waste of time for everyone involved. This is standard procedure when preparing to protect a client's legal interests following a contested separation. What I found was not what I expected to find. He opened the first folder. Over the previous 4 years, Prescott had registered a series of assets under my name. A warehouse property in Red Hook, Brooklyn, currently leased to a logistics company at $42,000 per month. A residential unit on the 31st floor of a building on West 54th Street in Midtown, currently generating $11,000 per month in rental income. A minority stake in Sterling Capital, his own company representing 8.3% of total shares. The combined assessed value of these holdings, as of the previous quarter, was slightly above $8 million. I looked at the list for a moment. Why would he do this? I asked, though I already had a partial answer forming. 2 reasons most likely operating together, Pemberton said. First, Sterling Capital has been under scrutiny from the IRS for the past 18 months over revenue reporting discrepancies. Placing assets under a spouse's name is a recognized though legally questionable method of insulating them from potential seizure. Second, your husband had accumulated significant personal debt through a series of private credit arrangements, and his creditors have limited ability to pursue assets that are not in his name. He paused and looked at me steadily. The relevant legal point for you is this. Under New York domestic relations law, when a divorce decree is issued without a formal asset division proceeding, each party retains the assets currently in their name. Prescott filed for divorce without initiating asset division. His attorney presumably was confident this would not be a problem because he expected you to have neither the resources nor the representation to contest anything. Pemberton allowed himself a brief pause that was the closest he came to expressing irony. That calculation has since changed. I sat with this for a moment. Outside the study window, the March light was different from the January light that had greeted me when I arrived, longer and less apologetic, the kind of light that suggests the season is prepared to eventually negotiate. $8 million, in my name. Put there by the man who had paid me $15,000 and told me to vacate the apartment within 30 days. There is one more piece, Pemberton said, opening the second folder. Sterling Capital's cash flow has deteriorated significantly in the past 2 quarters. Prescott has been servicing debt with operating revenue, which means the business itself is being hollowed out. My estimate is that without a significant capital infusion within the next 4 to 6 months, the company will be unable to meet its obligations. He closed the folder and folded his hands on the table. I want to be clear that I am not recommending any particular course of action, he said. I am presenting you with information. What you decide to do with it is entirely your decision. He looked at me with the precise attention of someone who has presented information to powerful people for a long time and knows the difference between the ones who get afraid and the ones who get interested. But I will ask you one question because Mr. Montgomery believes it is worth asking. He leaned forward very slightly. The man who built this situation did so because he was certain he would always control the outcome. His company needs a lifeline. The question is whether you want to be the one who throws it to him. The March light came through the window and lay across the table between us, and I looked at it for a moment, and then I looked at Pemberton, and I thought about a hospital room in January, and a check for $15,000 dropped on a bedside table, and a voice that had said, "You were never family Marin, you were a medical resource." "Tell me," I said, "exactly how desperate is he?" Pemberton answered my question about Prescott's finances for the next 40 minutes, without once using the word desperate, though everything he said amounted to the same thing. Sterling Capital's primary revenue stream, a series of licensing agreements with mid-tier textile manufacturers in the Southeast, had been deteriorating for 18 months, as two of the three major clients had moved their contracts to competitors. The company's operating account was being used to service a private credit facility that Prescott had opened 3 years ago at terms that made sense only if he had expected his revenue to grow substantially, which it had not. His personal account, separate from the business, showed the pattern of someone managing a slow leak, selling assets, incrementally moving money between accounts in ways that delayed the appearance of a problem without solving it. He had approximately 4 months before the arithmetic became impossible to manage. I listened to all of it with the particular quality of attention I had been developing over the past several weeks, the kind that does not react to information as it arrives but holds it, turns it, looks at the structure of it. When Pemberton finished, I asked 2 questions. He answered both of them. Then I told him what I wanted to do. He was quiet for a moment after I finished. "It can be done," he said. "All of it is legally sound provided the structure is built correctly." He looked at me in the way he had begun to look at me in recent weeks, with something that was not quite surprise and not quite approval, but was somewhere in the space between. "I want to be certain you understand the exposure. If any part of the structure is challenged, Conrad's name cannot appear. Neither can yours, not yet." "Delaware registration," I said. "Nominee directors, no visible link to Montgomery Group until we want one." Pemberton nodded once. "Phoenix Capital." Conrad was in the room by then. He had returned from the city and had been standing in the doorway for the last portion of the conversation, which neither Pemberton nor I had acknowledged, but both of us had been aware of. He came to the table and sat down and looked at the folders spread between us. "I want to be clear about something," he said. He looked at me directly. "I will support whatever you decide to do here, entirely and without reservation, but I want to make sure the goal is yours and not mine." He paused. "What do you want from this Marin? Not what he deserves. What do you want?" I thought about it for a moment. Not because I did not know the answer, but because I wanted to say it correctly. "I want the truth to be said out loud," I said. "Not in a lawyer's office, not in a sealed court filing, out loud in front of people who matter to him in a room he chose to walk into." I paused. "I want him to understand completely, and without any remaining ambiguity, that the thing he thought made me powerless was the thing that gave me everything." Conrad looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Pemberton. "Build it," he said. The next 3 weeks moved with the focused efficiency of people who know what they are doing and why. Pemberton filed the incorporation documents for Phoenix Capital in Delaware on a Thursday, using a law firm with no visible connection to Montgomery Group and a set of nominee directors whose names would not appear in any search result connected to Conrad or to me. The company's stated purpose was private equity investment, with a focus on distressed mid-market businesses, which was accurate enough to be unremarkable. Conrad, through a series of intermediaries that Pemberton had assembled over 2 days, purchased the outstanding debt obligations of Prescott Sterling from 4 separate creditors. The purchases were made at market rate, nothing that would draw attention, and were structured in a way that gave the appearance of routine portfolio acquisition by unrelated parties. Prescott would have no way of knowing that the various creditors he had been managing had been consolidated under a single entity until the moment that entity chose to make itself known. The invitation was Graves's idea, or rather the form of it was. He suggested the heavy stock, the gold embossing the delivery by hand. He said, without elaborating, that some people respond to the quality of the envelope before they respond to the content. and that for the kind of man Prescott Sterling was, the envelope would do considerable work before the letter inside had a chance to say anything. He was right. The invitation referenced Phoenix Capital and a private investment opportunity for select partners in the textile and manufacturing sector. It mentioned in the second paragraph a connection to the Montgomery portfolio, phrased carefully enough to imply an endorsement without stating one directly. It named a date in December for a formal gala at a midtown venue to be confirmed, at which a select group of potential partners would be introduced to Phoenix Capital's leadership and offered the opportunity to discuss terms. It did not name me. It did not name Conrad. It offered to a man whose company was 4 months from collapse the appearance of a door opening at exactly the moment when all the other doors were closing. On a Thursday mornings in late April, Rupert drove to the address of Sterling Capital's offices on West 47th Street and delivered the envelope to the front desk. He reported back to Graves by 2 in the afternoon. Graves told me at dinner. He opened it at his desk, Rupert said in the measured way he had of recounting things. I could see him from the lobby. He read it twice. Then he called someone. I set down my fork. He called someone immediately, I asked. Before I had reached the elevator, Rupert said. I looked out the dining room window at the April evening, the light longer now than it had been in January, the trees along the edge of the property beginning to show the first tentative green of a season deciding to begin. Somewhere across the city, in an apartment or an office or wherever Prescott Sterling was spending his Thursday evening, a door had just appeared in a wall that had been solid for months, and he was already walking toward it. He had built the weapon himself with my name on the deed. All I had done was pick it up. Pemberton's voice from earlier in the day came back to me steady and precise as it always was. The contract he was drafting would include a standard collateral clause requiring the borrower to secure the loan against personal assets. It would include an ethics and disclosure provision standard language in investment agreements requiring the borrower to confirm that all pledged assets were free of encumbrances and in the borrower's legal control. When Prescott signed his name to that clause, he would be attesting under penalty of federal law that the assets he was pledging belonged to him. They did not belong to him. They had never belonged to him. They belonged by his own design and by every relevant provision of New York state law to me. We're halfway through, and what's coming next is where everything starts to unravel. Before I go further, drop a comment with the number 9 so I know you're still with me. Just a reminder, this story weaves in fictional elements for storytelling purposes. Some details may not reflect reality, and if that's not your thing, it's completely okay to step away now. The envelope was on the breakfast table when I came downstairs at 7:15. Graves was at the sideboard, arranging the coffee service with his usual attention to the small details that made a house run without appearing to be run. He did not comment on the envelope. He did not indicate by any change in his expression or posture that he knew anything about how it had arrived or from whom. I had learned by then that Graves operated on the principle that information belonged to the person it was intended for, and that providing it efficiently and without editorializing was the entirety of his job. I sat down and looked at the envelope before I touched it. Brown craft paper, no return address. My first name written on the front in block letters that had been printed rather than handwritten, the kind of anonymous precision that suggests the sender wanted to be careful about what they left behind. The seal had been folded rather than glued, which meant it had been prepared quickly or by someone who did not want it to look official. I opened it with my coffee cup still in my hand. Inside were 3 items. A set of photographs printed on standard paper rather than photo stock, which suggested they had been produced from a digital source in some haste. A sheaf of bank statements, partial copies rather than complete records, the kind you get when someone photographs pages rather than printing from a system. And a single page of what appeared to be a medical intake summary, the top portion removed, leaving only the relevant fields. The photographs were taken in public places. A restaurant in the West Village where the tables were close enough together that the subjects could not have expected privacy. A hotel entrance in the Flatiron District. A parking structure on the west side of Chelsea. In each one, Delphine was with a man I did not recognize. He was in his late 30s, well-built, with the specific physical confidence of someone who spends time in environments where that quality matters. His name, according to the label someone had printed neatly beneath the first photograph, was Derek Harlan, owner of a nightclub in the meatpacking district. No prior connection to Sterling Capital or to Prescott. The bank statements were more specific than the photographs. Over a period of 14 months, a series of transfers had been made from a Sterling Capital operational account to a holding company registered in New Jersey. The amounts varied between $8,000 and $35,000 per transfer, and they occurred at irregular intervals that did not correspond to any billing cycle or vendor schedule I recognized from the financial reports Pemberton had been teaching me to read. The holding company's registered agent, when Pemberton looked it up later that morning, traced back through two intermediaries to Derek Harlan. Delphine had been moving money from Prescott's company to her own arrangement for over a year. The medical intake summary was the last item I looked at, and it was the most straightforward of the three. It indicated a gestational age of 12 weeks at the time of the appointment, which placed the date of conception in early February. Below that, in the standard fields that intake forms require, were blood type entries for the patient. Delphine's blood type was listed as B positive. I set the page down and looked at it for a moment. Prescott's blood type I knew because it was on the emergency contact card he kept in his desk, the one I had found during the second year of our marriage when I was looking for a pen and had read it without intending to and remembered without meaning to. He was A positive. A parent who is blood type A and a parent who is blood type B can produce a child who is type A, type B, type AB, or type O. Those are the four possibilities, and they are all within the range of normal inheritance. That much was simple biology, the kind taught in a high school classroom. However, I pulled out my phone and opened the notes application and wrote the blood types and the conception date and the 14 months of transfers and Derek Harlan's name, and then I sat for a moment looking at what I had written. Pemberton arrived at 9. I showed him the envelope and its contents without preamble. He went through each item with the methodical attention he brought to everything, turning pages, making notes in the small leather notebook he carried, not speaking until he had looked at everything twice. "The blood type is suggestive but not conclusive," he said, setting the medical summary down. "To establish paternity definitively, you would need a DNA test, which would require either voluntary participation or a court order. Neither is available to us at this point." "I know," I said. "I'm not trying to establish paternity. I'm trying to understand the full picture of what Delphine is doing." Pemberton looked at the bank statement copies. "What she appears to be doing," he said carefully, "is systematically removing funds from a company that is already in financial distress through a structure designed to obscure the destination. If Sterling Capital's auditors, or the IRS, were to examine these transactions, the question would not be whether they constitute fraud, but rather, how many separate counts?" He paused. "She is not a passive beneficiary of Prescott Sterling's situation. She is an active participant in accelerating it." I looked at the photographs on the table, Delphine and Derek Harlan at a restaurant table leaning toward each other in the particular way of people who are not concerned about being seen because they do not believe anyone is watching. "Neither of them knows the other is doing the same thing," I said. Pemberton considered this. "Prescott is using Delphine as cover for his own arrangements. Delphine is using Prescott as a funding source for hers. Each of them believes they are the architect of the situation." He allowed himself the brief pause that substituted for him for a longer expression of something. "It is a remarkably self-contained system." I closed the envelope and placed it in the drawer of the writing desk in the corner of the room, which had a key, and I locked it. "Not yet," I said. "We save it for the right moment." Graves appeared in the doorway to ask about lunch. Pemberton was already packing his notebook. The May morning outside the window was the kind that makes you remember what the world looks like when it is not January, all new leaves and lengthening light. And I sat for a moment after they had both left the room and thought about the specific quality of patience that this required. Everything was in motion. Everything was moving toward the same point. The only question was the timing, and timing, as Conrad had said to me once over breakfast with the Wall Street Journal open between us, is not about being fast. It is about knowing exactly when to stop waiting. My phone vibrated on the table. A message from Pemberton sent from his car on the way back to the city. Sterling Capital approached 3 separate lending institutions this week seeking emergency financing. All 3 declined. He is running out of options faster than our original estimate. I would not be surprised if he responds to the Phoenix Capital invitation within the next 2 weeks. I read the message twice and set the phone face down on the table. 2 weeks, perhaps less. The call from Pemberton came on a Tuesday afternoon in the 3rd week of May. While I was sitting at the long table in the Midtown office space he had arranged for Phoenix Capital's operational use, working through a set of quarterly reports that Conrad had asked me to analyze before Friday. The office was on the 22nd floor of a building on Lexington Avenue, unremarkable from the outside, and deliberately so, on the inside the kind of space that says functional rather than impressive chosen by Pemberton because it could be rented under the Phoenix Capital name without attracting the kind of attention that a Montgomery address would generate. I had been coming here 3 days a week for the past month. I knew which elevator bank was faster, and which coffee place on the ground floor understood what medium roast meant. Pemberton did not begin with pleasantries. Lavinia Sterling was admitted to Presbyterian this morning, he said. Septicemia. The attending physician is Dr. Weston. I set down my pen. Septicemia is a bloodstream infection, a condition where bacteria enter the circulatory system and trigger a systemic inflammatory response that, if not caught and treated quickly, can progress to organ failure. In a patient with an already compromised immune system, which Lavinia Sterling's bone marrow condition had ensured she was the prognosis without aggressive intervention was poor. I knew what had caused it before Pemberton said it. Dr. Weston's preliminary assessment, Pemberton continued, is that the infection originated from the blood transfusion she received in January. The stored unit she received that night was from a reserve that had been flagged for proximity to its expiration date. The record shows that an alternative did exist that night, the direct donation being prepared in the adjacent room. The stored unit was used because a hospital administrative clerk had reclassified the direct donation as unavailable before the procedure began. Pemberton's investigator traced the record change to a staff member who had received a wire transfer of $9,000 from a Sterling Capital account 3 days before the surgery. I was quiet for a moment. Prescott had not simply taken the stored blood for his mother out of desperation. He had manipulated the hospital's records to make it appear that the direct donation from the adjacent room was not an option, ensuring the stored unit would be used for Lavinia while the fresh donation went elsewhere. He had done this believing he was securing his mother the better option. He had secured her instead a 4-month delayed death sentence written in administrative data. Does Lavinia know? I asked. Not the cause, Pemberton said. She knows she is ill. She does not yet know why. And Prescott? He arrived at the hospital approximately 40 minutes after admission. Dr. Weston spoke with him in the corridor outside Lavinia's room. Pemberton's voice carried the particular neutral quality he used when he was about to say something that he considered significant. Dr. Weston informed him of the likely origin of the infection. He did not soften the explanation. I thought about Dr. Weston delivering that information to Prescott in a hospital corridor, and I thought about what it must have looked like on Prescott's face in the moment he understood what he had done. There is one more thing, Pemberton said. After Mr. Sterling left the hospital, he made a phone call from the parking structure on the ground level. Our surveillance coverage of the building captured the audio. He sent the file while we were still on the phone. I put in my earphones and played it. The recording was not high quality. There was ambient noise, the sound of a parking structure, distant traffic, the echo of a large concrete space. But the voice was clear enough, and Prescott's particular cadence that measured controlled delivery that I had listened to across 4 years of dinners and mornings, and the small transactions of a shared life was unmistakable even through the compression. He was speaking to Delphine. He was not speaking about Lavinia's condition. He was not speaking about medical options or second opinions or the kind of things a son says when his mother is critically ill. He was speaking in the efficient tone of someone clearing items from a list about what would happen once the Montgomery deal closed. He said that the situation with his mother had become complicated in ways he had not anticipated. He said that the arrangement they had discussed, the facility upstate, would need to be moved up on the timeline. He said this in the same voice he had used when discussing real estate or quarterly projections, or any of the other administrative concerns of a life organized around the management of assets. His mother was in a hospital bed on the fourth floor of the building he was standing beneath, and he was scheduling her removal to a care facility in the same tone he might use to reschedule a meeting. I took out my earphones and set them on the table. The quarterly reports were still spread in front of me, neat columns of numbers that meant things I now knew how to read. The afternoon light came through the east-facing window at the angle it took at this time of year, direct and clear, leaving nothing soft. I had expected when this moment came to feel something hot, anger or satisfaction, or the particular emotion that has no clean name but lives in the space between justice and revenge. What I felt instead was something much quieter, a stillness. The specific stillness of a person who has been waiting a long time and has just heard clearly and without ambiguity that the waiting is almost over. I picked up my phone and called Pemberton back. "The gala date," I said when he answered. "December. I want a specific date, and I want the venue confirmed." "I was going to suggest the Plaza," Pemberton said. "Grand ballroom. It seats 300 comfortably, and it is the kind of room that Prescott Sterling would consider worth dressing for." "Book it," I said. "There is one more item," Pemberton said. "Dr. Weston called the office this afternoon. He asked if you were available for a brief call at your convenience. He said it was not urgent." I looked at the quarterly reports on the table for a moment. "Tell him I will call him this evening," I said. I hung up and turned back to the window. Somewhere across the city, in a parking structure beneath a hospital where his mother was fighting an infection, his own decisions had caused Prescott Sterling was still on the phone with Delphine, making his arrangements certain that the situation was under control. He had 4 months left before December. In 4 months, a great deal can change. 3 days after Pemberton's call about Lavinia, I walked into the Lexington Avenue office to find a single document waiting on my desk. It was a loan application. $3 million. Submitted by Prescott Sterling to a mid-sized private lender called Hargrove Credit Partners, based in Stamford, Connecticut. The collateral listed on page 4 was a warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn, and a residential property on West 54th Street, Manhattan. Both of those properties were registered under my name. I read the page 3 times, then I set it down and called Pemberton. He answered before the second ring. "You've seen it," he said. It wasn't a question. He used my assets as collateral. I kept my voice level. "Without my signature, without a power of attorney, without anything." "Correct." Pemberton's tone was measured the way it always was when the situation was serious. He submitted the application 4 days ago. Hargrove Credit Partners completed their internal review yesterday. They flagged the collateral records to a title search firm, which is standard procedure. The title search came back showing your name on both properties. Hargrove then contacted our legal office because Phoenix Capital holds a secondary lien on the Red Hook warehouse from the debt purchase agreement last month. That secondary lien had been Pemberton's idea from the beginning. A quiet legal claim registered through a Delaware intermediary, invisible unless someone ran a full title search. Prescott had never known it existed. "So Hargrove knows something is wrong," I said. "Hargrove knows there is a conflict of interest. They don't yet know the full picture. I've asked them to pause the application for 48 hours while we review documentation." He paused. "Marin, what Prescott has done constitutes bank fraud under federal law, specifically 18 U.S.C., Section 1344. He submitted materially false statements to a financial institution to obtain money. He represented that he had the authority to pledge those assets. He did not." I knew the term bank fraud. I had heard Pemberton use it before in passing in other contexts. But hearing it applied to Prescott to a document sitting on my desk with his signature at the bottom made it feel different. More real. More final. "Can we use this?" I asked. "We already are." A brief silence. "There is also a wire fraud component. The application was transmitted electronically across state lines from New York to a Connecticut lender. That invokes 18 U.S.C. Section 1343. Each transmission, each electronic document sent in furtherance of the scheme is a separate count. If we count the initial application, the supporting financial statements, and the 2 property attestation forms, Prescott has generated at minimum 4 federal counts before a single dollar changed hands." I sat back in my chair. Outside Midtown Manhattan carried on as it always did. Cabs, pedestrians, gray afternoon light cutting between buildings. Nothing about the street below suggested that somewhere across the city, a man had just signed his own arrest warrant without knowing it. "Does he know the application was flagged?" I asked. "No. Hargrove will send him a standard delay notice citing additional document review. He will interpret it as routine." Pemberton's voice carried the faint trace of quiet satisfaction that he rarely allowed himself. "He is still waiting for the money." I thought about that. Prescott sitting in his Sterling Capital office on Park Avenue, checking his phone for a wire transfer that would never arrive. $3 million he believed was coming. $3 million he needed to cover the cash flow gap before his creditors noticed the shortfall. He had used my name, my property, my legal identity as a tool, the same way he had used my blood 2 years before. "What happens next?" I said. "I have prepared a formal complaint package for the FBI Financial Crimes Unit." Pemberton's words came in their usual precise sequence. "It includes the loan application, the false property attestation Sterling Capital's internal financial reports that Delphine's associate forwarded to us, and the audio recording from the parking structure. Together, this constitutes a pattern of fraudulent activity sufficient for a federal investigation." "You're filing it now?" "Not yet." He let a brief pause sit between us before continuing. "Filing now would trigger an investigation that moves on its own timeline. Prescott would be interviewed, possibly tipped off, potentially given the opportunity to move assets or negotiate. We would lose control of the sequence." Another pause. "The gala is in December, 6 months from now. If we hold the complaint until we have one final piece of evidence obtained in a public setting, the case becomes airtight. The arrest becomes unavoidable." I understood what he was describing. Not just a legal case, a moment, a controlled public irreversible moment, where Prescott could not manage the narrative, or call in a favor, or claim misunderstanding. A moment where everything he had built and stolen and manipulated would collapse in front of exactly the people whose opinions had always mattered most to him. 6 months, I said. 6 months, Pemberton confirmed. I looked at the loan application again. Prescott's signature was confident and clean at the bottom, the same practiced signature I had once watched him write on a marriage license at City Hall. He had signed that document with the same certainty, the same belief that the paperwork was just a formality, that the outcome was already settled. He was always so certain of the outcome. "Lock it," I said. "Hold the complaint until December. And Pemberton, make sure Hargrove doesn't extend that loan." "Already done," he said. After I ended the call, I sat for a long time without moving. The document stayed on the desk in front of me. $3 million, my name on 2 properties, his signature, 4 federal counts before a single wire transfer had cleared. I thought about the hospital room in January, the check for $15,000, the way Prescott had set it on the edge of my bed as though it were a reasonable conclusion to 4 years of marriage. He had always believed he was the one setting traps. I pulled the document into the folder Pemberton had prepared and sealed it. 48 hours later, Pemberton sent a brief message: "Hargrove has formally declined the application." Prescott's office called twice. No response given. I read the message once, then set my phone face down on the desk and went back to work. But that evening, Pemberton called again. His voice carried something different this time. Not urgency exactly, but a weight I hadn't heard before. "There's one more thing," he said. "Agent Drummond from the FBI Financial Crimes Unit reached out to our office independently. Someone else has already filed a tip." I went still. "Who?" I asked. Pemberton was quiet for a moment. "We don't know yet," he said. "But whoever it was, they filed it 2 weeks ago, before we had prepared anything." The first Monday of June arrived quietly without ceremony. I took the elevator to the 20th floor at 8:45. The receptionist nodded as I passed. Pemberton and Conrad were already inside the corner office, 2 folders on the table between them, and a third chair pulled out waiting. I sat down without being asked. Pemberton opened the first folder. A single page. Phoenix Capital's updated operating agreement, filed in Delaware the previous Friday. Near the top of the second paragraph under Executive Officers, my name appeared in clean black print. "Myron Montgomery, Chief Executive Officer." "The board resolution was signed last Thursday," Pemberton said. Conrad authorized the appointment as founding shareholder. The filing is complete. As of today, you are the legal CEO of Phoenix Capital LLC. I looked at the page. I had known this moment was coming. Conrad and I had spoken about it across months of evening conversations at the Greenwich estate, across early morning briefings and long walks through the winter grounds. The appointment itself was not a surprise, but seeing my name on a legal document in an office I had not imagined occupying a year ago required a moment I allowed myself to take. Any questions about the structure? Pemberton asked. Not right now, I said. Conrad looked at me the way he had learned to, direct without pressure. You've earned the title, he said. Now use it. One important detail Pemberton had built into the company's formation, Phoenix Capital, was registered through a Delaware nominee director structure, meaning the public-facing filings listed appointed representatives rather than my name or Conrad's. Under Delaware law, this arrangement is entirely legal and commonly used by private investment firms to protect ownership privacy during sensitive operations. Prescott, when he received the company's debt purchase notices and the gala invitation, had seen only the company name. He had no way of knowing who stood behind it. He was walking toward December without a single piece of that information. The 3 months that followed were the most focused of my life. Conrad had given me the foundation during winter and spring. The language of finance, the mechanics of reading a room before the room had formed its opinion of you. June through August belonged to something different. They belonged to execution. I attended board-level meetings at 2 of Conrad's Midtown subsidiaries. I reviewed Phoenix Capital's active acquisition files with Pemberton every Tuesday and Thursday. By mid-July, I was drafting position memos that Pemberton returned with minimal revisions. By August, I was presenting directly to Conrad's institutional partners without preparation notes. Graves noticed the change without commenting on it directly. One Friday evening when I returned to Greenwich, a dark green leather portfolio had appeared on the desk in my room. My initials embossed in the lower corner, no note attached. I used it every day after that. In the second week of July, Pemberton called a midday meeting with no agenda listed. Agent Drummond has been in contact again, he said. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit had been running a parallel investigation since May, independent of the complaint Pemberton had not yet filed. The anonymous tip from mid-May had pointed Drummond toward Sterling Capital's investor disclosures. His team had spent 6 weeks pulling the underlying financial statements. Prescott overstated Sterling Capital's revenues by approximately 31% across 2022 and 2023, Pemberton said. He also omitted 3 creditor agreements totaling just under $4 million from the liabilities section of his investor reports. He set his pen down. Under Section 10B of the Securities Exchange Act and the corresponding Rule 10b-5, making false or misleading statements in connection with investment securities is a federal crime. In plain terms, Prescott told investors his company was worth significantly more than it was in order to keep their money in place. That is securities fraud. I absorbed the number, 31%, $4 million in hidden debt presented to investors as clean balance sheets. Why hasn't Drummond moved yet? I asked. Financial crimes investigations at this scale typically run 12 to 18 months before charges are filed, Pemberton said. A premature arrest risks alerting connected parties, Delphine Derrick Harlan, who could destroy records or leave the jurisdiction. Drummond is building a complete case, not a fast one. He paused. He reached out because Phoenix Capital's secondary lien on the Red Hook warehouse makes us a documented party of interest. He wanted confirmation we would not take independent action before his investigation concluded. What did you tell him? I told him we had December in mind. In early August, I had dinner with Dr. Weston. He had been the attending physician who expelled Prescott from my hospital room on the night this all began. The man who had stayed after everyone else had left, who had told me the truth about where my blood had actually gone. Since January, we had exchanged occasional brief messages. His August note was careful and unhurried, suggesting a small restaurant near Gramercy Park that he mentioned passing often but never entering. I said yes. Nathan Weston was quieter outside the hospital than I had expected, more deliberate with his words, in a setting where nothing was urgent. But the quality I had noticed on that January night was still there, a steadiness that did not come from managing appearances, but from having decided a long time ago what he believed. We talked for nearly 3 hours, not about Prescott, not about Phoenix Capital, about what it felt like to grow up in temporary placements and never fully trust a room because every room eventually ended. About what it meant to have a father at 30. About small things too. The best route through Midtown on a Thursday evening, the particular color of the East River in August at dusk. When I returned to Greenwich that night, I sat on the edge of my bed and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly. The absence of bracing for the next thing. On the last Friday of August, Pemberton appeared at the office door while I was reviewing a lease amendment. He set a printed page on the edge of my desk. The gala confirmation list, he said. The Plaza, Grand Ballroom, December 14th. 83 confirmed attendees. Investors, attorneys, 2 city officials, several names from the financial press. Near the top of the list, confirmed 2 weeks earlier through a formal RSVP, one name stood apart from the rest. Prescott Sterling, Sterling Capital. 2 lines below Delphine Rousseau, Sterling Capital guest. I set the page down. 4 months, I said. 4 months. Pemberton agreed. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Drummond called this morning. He said his team will be ready by December. After he left, I turned to the window. Late August light cut long across the Midtown rooftops and threw shadows east toward the river. The city looked exactly as it always had. Dense, indifferent, full of people who believed they already knew how their stories ended. I thought about Prescott reading that gala invitation, confirming his attendance with the same easy signature he had used on loan documents and divorce papers, certain as he had always been that the room already belonged to him. I turned back to the desk and went to work. December came in quietly the way danger sometimes does. The 3 months between August and December had passed with a steadiness I had not expected. Pemberton ran the legal preparations in careful sequence. Drummond's team worked their side of the case without interference from ours. Conrad reviewed the gala program, once asked 2 precise questions, and approved it without revision. The plaza confirmed the grand ballroom setup in October. By November, every structural element was in place. What remained was the waiting. I had come to Greenwich on the Friday evening before the gala, 2 days ahead of schedule. Rupert made the drive without comment, which was his manner. The estate was quieter than usual. Graves had reduced the weekend staff, and the main rooms had the particular stillness of a house that was conserving itself before something significant. Conrad and I had dinner together. Afterward, he set down his fork and looked at me directly. "How are you sleeping?" he asked. "Well enough," I said. He studied me for a moment, the careful attention of a man long accustomed to rooms full of people saying exactly what was expected of them. "You don't have to perform steadiness here," he said. "Not with me." I looked at the table. "I keep running the sequence," I said. "Every document, every conversation Pemberton has had with Drummond, every step back to January. I keep looking for the thing we missed. And, I haven't found it." I paused. "That should feel reassuring." "But it doesn't," Conrad said. "No." He was quiet for a moment. "That feeling is what competence looks like before something that matters. People who feel nothing either have done it so many times it has lost meaning, or they don't fully understand what they are carrying." He picked up his water glass. "You understand exactly what you are carrying." I excused myself not long after and went upstairs. I had been in bed less than an hour when my phone lit up on the nightstand. The message came through an encrypted document transfer application, end-to-end protected, sender anonymous by design. Pemberton had recommended the platform months earlier for sharing sensitive legal files. The sender field was completely blank. The message was 4 sentences. "You don't know who sent this. That's intentional. What you're planning for December 14th will not go the way you expect. Someone in your circle has been talking to Prescott Sterling." I read it twice. Then I sat up and turned on the lamp. The room was exactly as I had left it. The pale walls, the winter landscape above the fireplace, my green leather portfolio on the desk with a briefing document visible beneath the flap. Nothing disturbed. Nothing different. The message on my phone was the only thing in the room that had changed. I thought about it carefully. The most probable explanation was an attempt to destabilize, to make me spend the 48 hours before the gala questioning every person around me. That kind of interference did not require access to real information. It only required knowing that I was planning something, and that uncertainty introduced at the right moment could do significant damage on its own. But I also thought about May. The anonymous tip filed with the FBI weeks before Pemberton had prepared anything pointing Drummond directly toward Sterling Capital's falsified investor reports. That source had never been identified. It was possible, not certain but possible, that the same person was now reaching out again with something closer. I called Pemberton at 11:17. He answered before the second ring. I received a message, I said, and read it to him word for word. A silence followed. Not surprise. The silence of a careful mind moving through implications. Forward it to me now, he said. Encrypted platforms preserve transmission metadata even when the sender field is blank. I'll have our technical team run an analysis first thing in the morning. What are they looking for? Device network data embedded in the transmission header. If the sender used a standard cellular connection rather than a routed proxy, we can narrow the originating network to a geographic area. It won't give us a name, but it may give us a radius. He paused. In the meantime, the message says someone in your circle has been speaking to Prescott. Walk through that list. I already had. Conrad, you Graves, Rupert, Nathan. And your assessment. None of them, I said. I share that assessment, Pemberton said. But there is a second possibility worth considering. Prescott may have placed someone within the plaza's event staff. A catering coordinator, a floor manager, someone with access to the setup documentation and program schedule. If he knows the presentation order and timing, he may be attempting a preemptive move before Saturday evening. Can Drummond sweep the venue in advance? Drummond's team is already confirmed on-site for midday on the 14th. I'll contact him at 7 in the morning and request an advance walkthrough by early afternoon. A brief pause. Marin, this message may be a threat designed to stop you. It may equally be a warning from someone who wants you to succeed. We should hold both possibilities and let neither one change the plan. I ended the call and sat with the phone in my hand. Outside, the snow had stopped. The lawn was white and still under a sky that had cleared to deep black. Greenwich in December had a particular quality of silence that I had come to recognize over the past year. Not empty, but patient. The kind of silence that belonged to a place that had absorbed many difficult things and continued regardless. Pemberton's technical team returned their analysis by 10:15 the following morning. The metadata was genuinely scrubbed, not the incomplete scrub of an amateur, but a deliberate professional-grade removal of identifying information. What remained was a single data point. The transmission had originated from a device operating on a New York City cellular network within a radius covering roughly the Upper East Side and Midtown East. Prescott's territory, but also the territory of several 100,000 other people. We cannot identify the sender, Pemberton said on the call, but we can confirm this was not a random attempt. Whoever sent this has technical sophistication and a New York presence. That narrows the probable profile considerably. Drummond? I asked. His office is in Lower Manhattan, outside the radius. A pause. It could be someone inside Prescott's own operation who has decided the direction of the wind. I thought about Delphine, about Derek Harlan, about the 14 months of transfers from Sterling Capital's accounts that Pemberton had documented in May. Keep the gala as planned, I said. Already confirmed, Pemberton said. Drummond's advance team reaches the plaza at 2 tomorrow afternoon. The hotel's head of security has been quietly informed of the law enforcement interest and has confirmed full cooperation. Your presentation remains at 9:45. Conrad's introductory remarks at 9:30. Prescott's table is confirmed at Section 4. Good. One recommendation, Pemberton added. Arrive at 8:50, not earlier. Let the room form around the other guests first. Walk in when the room is already settled. I understood the logic immediately. An early arrival meant standing in the lobby fielding small talk while others assembled around you. An on-time arrival meant entering a room that had already formed, a room that had to pause and look up. 8:50, I said. After the call, I went downstairs. Graves had set coffee in the small sitting room. Conrad was already there with a newspaper folded on the arm of his chair. He looked up when I entered. Pemberton called me as well, he said. I assume the decision is made. We proceed, I said. He nodded once and returned to his paper. I stood at the window with my coffee. The lawn was bright in the December morning light, the snow still clean and undisturbed. Rupert's car was already in the drive, positioned and waiting, though I hadn't asked him to arrive early. I picked up my phone one last time and read the 4 sentences again. What you're planning for December 14th will not go the way you expect. Perhaps not, but whoever had sent that message had assumed I was planning for a single outcome. They did not know that I had spent 11 months preparing for every outcome. I deleted the message and set my phone face down on the windowsill. Tomorrow evening, I would walk into the plaza at 8:50, and I would not look like someone who had spent the night before reading warnings in a quiet room. I would look exactly like what I was. Rupert pulled onto Fifth Avenue at 8:43, 7 minutes ahead of schedule. He slowed the car without being asked, circling the block once before rejoining the queue of vehicles moving toward the plaza's entrance. I understood what he was doing. He was giving me the 7 minutes back. Through the window, the hotel looked exactly as it always had. The white limestone facade, the copper roofline gone pale green with age, the entrance lit in warm gold against the December dark. A line of town cars moved steadily through the arrivals lane. Doormen in long coats stood at measured intervals. Everything composed, everything exactly as it was supposed to be. "Rupert," I said. "Miss Montgomery. Thank you for the year." He was quiet for a moment. In the rearview mirror, I caught the slight adjustment of his expression, something restrained and genuine at the same time. "It has been a privilege," he said, genuinely. The car reached the entrance at 8:49. Rupert came around to open the door and I stepped out into the cold December air. The grand ballroom was already full. Pemberton had been right about the timing. The room had formed in my absence. Guests at their tables, conversations underway, the low, steady sound of an evening already in motion. The program would not begin until 9:30. I had 40 minutes in which the room was simply a room, and I was simply a person entering it. A floor manager in a black jacket met me at the entrance and guided me toward the section reserved for Phoenix Capital. Conrad was already seated at the head table near the stage, speaking quietly with a man I recognized as one of his Midtown institutional partners. Graves stood at a discreet distance behind Conrad's chair, not conspicuous, but present. Pemberton was 2 tables over, a folder closed on the table in front of him, watching the room with the careful attention he brought to every space he entered. He caught my eye briefly, a small nod, nothing more. I took my seat and accepted a glass of water from a server. The ballroom was dressed for December. White arrangements at the table centers, warm light across the room. The kind of understated formal setting that the plaza managed without apparent effort. At section 4, 12 feet from the stage and slightly to the left, Prescott Sterling sat with his back partially toward me. He was in a dark suit, charcoal or navy, difficult to tell in the ballroom light. His posture was the same as it had always been, composed, deliberate, the posture of a man who had long since decided that rooms existed to accommodate him. He was speaking to the man beside him with the easy confidence of someone who had attended 100 events like this and expected them all to end the same way. Delphine was to his right. A dark green dress, her hair arranged carefully. She was scanning the room with the slightly elevated attention of someone who had been told to pay attention without being told exactly why. Neither of them had seen me yet. I kept my eyes on the stage and reached for my water glass. It was Delphine who noticed first. I became aware of it without looking directly at her. The way a person's scanning gaze stops moving when it has found something. A stillness in peripheral vision. I set my glass down and turned slightly, and she was looking at me across the ballroom with an expression that moved through 3 stages in rapid sequence, recognition, calculation. And then, something harder. She leaned toward Prescott and said something brief. He turned. The moment Prescott Sterling saw me, something changed in his face. Not dramatically. He was too experienced for dramatic reactions in public settings. But the composed certainty shifted, replaced by something I had not seen on him before. A recalibration. He was doing what people do when a fact they had not accounted for suddenly appears in the middle of a plan they believed was complete. His eyes moved from me to the Phoenix Capital placard on the table in front of me, then back to me. I held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then looked away. Delphine stood up. She crossed the ballroom with the deliberate pace of someone who had decided on a course of action and was not interested in reconsidering it. Several guests near the aisle turned slightly as she passed. She reached my table and stopped, her hand resting on the back of the empty chair beside me. "I'm not sure you were invited," she said, loud enough for the four nearest tables to hear clearly. I looked up at her. "The invitation came through Phoenix Capital's office in October," I said. "I can have Pemberton pull the confirmation if that would help." A flicker of something crossed her face. She hadn't expected a direct answer. "This is a financial industry event," she said, "not a charity function." The emphasis was deliberate. An invitation for anyone listening to draw a particular conclusion about who belonged in the room and who did not. Several heads had turned. The conversations at the nearest tables had quieted. "I'm aware of what it is," I said. I kept my voice level and my hands still. "I'm the CEO of Phoenix Capital. We hold a registered financial interest in several assets relevant to the evening's discussion. Our attendance is appropriate." I paused for one beat. "Is there something specific you needed, Delphine? Or were you planning to stand there for the rest of the program?" A short silence followed. Not uncomfortable for me. I had spent 11 months building toward this room, and I had not spent any of that time imagining I would arrive without someone attempting exactly this. Delphine was a woman accustomed to controlling how spaces felt. She had walked across the ballroom expecting to destabilize me in front of an audience. She had miscalculated. The man at the table to my left, one of Conrad's institutional contacts, a silver-haired attorney in his 60s, cleared his throat quietly and returned to his conversation. A small, deliberate signal. One by one, the nearest tables followed. Delphine held her position for a moment longer. Then she straightened, smoothed the front of her dress, and walked back toward Section 4. I picked up my water glass. At the far edge of the room, near a service corridor, I caught a brief glimpse of a man in a plain dark suit who was not part of the event staff. He had the still, observational posture of someone trained to watch a room without appearing to watch it. He glanced toward me for a fraction of a second, then looked away. Agent Drummond's advance team was in position. At 9:28, Pemberton appeared at my shoulder. "2 minutes," he said quietly. "Conrad is ready. The AV team has the presentation loaded." Drummond confirmed his team is in place at all 4 exits and the main floor. I set my glass down and looked toward the stage. The podium was lit, the screen behind it, dark, waiting. 83 people in formal dress, mid-conversation, mid-drink, mid-whatever story they had told themselves about what this evening was going to be. At Section 4, Prescott was watching the stage with an expression I could not read from this distance. Whatever he was thinking, whatever partial picture he had assembled in the past 40 minutes, he did not yet have enough information to act. He was about to get it all at once. "Is everything in place?" I asked. "Everything," Pemberton said. Conrad stepped up to the podium. The room began to quiet. I stood up, smoothed the front of my dress, and moved toward the stage. Before I tell you what Marin said when she walked up to that microphone, before I reveal exactly what she put on that screen in front of 83 people, including Prescott himself, comment the word "ready" so I know you're still here with me. This story contains fictional elements crafted for meaningful storytelling. Not every detail mirrors reality, but if you've stayed this long, I think you already know the message is worth hearing. The podium light was warmer than I expected. 83 people, white table arrangements. Conrad in the front row with his hands folded, watching me with the steady attention of someone who had already decided the outcome did not depend on him anymore. I adjusted the microphone, opened the folder Pemberton had prepared, and looked out at the room. At Section 4, Prescott Sterling had gone completely still. "Phoenix Capital was incorporated 14 months ago," I said. "In that time, it acquired a financial interest in 3 New York properties, purchased a consolidated debt portfolio from a distressed investment firm, and identified a pattern of misrepresentation affecting investors in this room tonight." The quality of the silence changed. "I want to be specific," I said, "because the people here deserve specificity." The first section was the loan application. I advanced the slide. Prescott's signature appeared on the screen behind me, clean, confident, exactly as it had looked on every document he had ever signed, with the certainty that the outcome was already settled. In May of this year, Sterling Capital submitted a loan application to a Connecticut lender requesting $3 million. The collateral listed on that application included 2 properties registered under my name. Prescott Sterling had no authorization to pledge those assets. I paused. Submitting false statements to a financial institution is bank fraud under federal law. Transmitting those documents electronically across state lines is wire fraud. Each document filed is a separate federal count. He generated 4 counts before a single dollar changed hands. A murmur moved through the room. The second section was the investor disclosures. Sterling Capital's financial reports for 2022 and 2023 overstated revenues by 31%. 3 creditor agreements totaling just under $4 million were omitted entirely from the liabilities presented to investors. I looked out at the room without focusing on any single face. Several of you made investment decisions based on those figures. Under federal securities law, making false statements to investors in connection with a security is a crime. The numbers Prescott Sterling showed you were not the real numbers. He knew that when he showed them to you. The murmur became something quieter and more serious. Prescott's hands were flat on the table. He was calculating. I could see it from the stage, the rapid, diminishing assessment of a man who had just realized every option he thought he had was already closed. The third section required something different from me. Phoenix Capital exists because of a medical event in January of this year, I said. During a post-explosion emergency at New York Presbyterian Hospital, a blood donation I made was administered to a patient who was not the intended recipient. My blood type is Rh null, fewer than 50 known carriers in the world. It can be donated to any recipient in an emergency. I looked briefly at Conrad. That patient was Conrad Montgomery. The connection led to a DNA comparison. 2 independent certified laboratories confirmed the same result. Conrad Montgomery is my biological father. I am the daughter who disappeared from a Brooklyn street 23 years ago. The room was completely silent. The assets Prescott registered under my name were not an act of generosity. They were a shield, protection from IRS scrutiny and personal creditor claims while he used my legal identity the same way he had used my blood, without my knowledge, without my consent. I closed the folder. Everything I have described tonight, the loan application, the falsified investor disclosures, the DNA certification, and the full audit of Sterling Capital's financial records, has been provided to the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. That investigation has been active since May of this year. I stepped back from the microphone. The silence held for 3 full seconds. Then the room broke, not into applause, but into the urgent overlapping sound of 83 people turning to one another with the energy of a room that has just had its assumptions rearranged. At Section 4, Prescott pushed back his chair and stood. His face had gone the color of the white linen. His eyes moved one final time across the room, toward the exits, toward the stage, toward me, with the expression of a man who had run every remaining calculation and found nothing left to use. Delphine sat perfectly still beside him, both hands in her lap, eyes on the table. I stepped down from the stage and walked back to the Phoenix Capital table. I sat down, folded my hands, and waited. Behind me, from the direction of the main entrance, came the measured and unhurried footsteps of someone who had been waiting all evening for exactly this moment. Agent Drummond reached Section 4 before Prescott had taken a single step toward the exit. He identified himself quietly the way federal agents do when the situation is already controlled. No raised voice, no theater. Just a badge, a name, and 4 words that carried more weight than anything else spoken in the grand ballroom that evening. I have a warrant. He delivered the Miranda rights in the same level tone. The right to remain silent. The right to an attorney. Each word placed cleanly without emphasis, the way someone recites something they intend to get exactly right every time. Prescott stood with his hands at his sides and said nothing. His jaw was set. His eyes moved once across the room, toward the exits, toward the agents already positioned at each one, and then went still. There was nowhere to go. I suspected he had known that from the moment I had walked onto the stage. The warrant covered 3 primary counts. Drummond had told Pemberton the previous week that a 4th charge, healthcare fraud related to the manipulation of hospital records before Marin's surgery, was being prepared separately and would be added to the indictment within 30 days. Prescott did not look at me as he passed my table. I did not look away. Delphine remained in her chair while a third agent conducted a voluntary interview beside her. Pemberton appeared at my shoulder and explained it briefly. Under federal law, a person can be questioned without being formally detained as long as they are free to leave. Delphine was cooperating. She had 14 months of transfer records connecting her to Derek Harlan sitting in Drummond's files, and she was intelligent enough to understand that the first person to cooperate in a multi-party fraud case receives the most favorable consideration from the prosecutor. I watched her speak quietly to the agent. The woman who had crossed the ballroom 2 hours earlier to humiliate me in front of 83 people was gone. What remained was smaller and more honest. Conrad came to my table 20 minutes later. He sat down, looked at me, and asked how I was. I told him I wasn't sure yet. He accepted that without comment, which was one of the things I had come to value most about him. After a moment, he told me that Lavinia had called Pemberton's office. She had been watching a financial news feed at home. Her health had not permitted her to attend, and someone in the room had broadcast part of the presentation. She had seen enough. She wanted to speak with me. Conrad said I didn't have to. Not tonight, I told him I would. Pemberton set the phone in front of me. I picked it up. Lavinia's voice was quieter than I remembered. The authority that had defined it in January had been replaced by something older and more tired. I knew about the blood, she said. I knew why Prescott found you. I told myself it was necessary. A pause. I was wrong. About all of it. She did not ask for forgiveness. I did not offer it. But I told her that I heard her and that it was enough for tonight. Then I ended the call and set the phone on the table. The ballroom had thinned. Some guests had left immediately after the arrest. Others remained in small groups, speaking in low tones. Through the tall windows, the lights of Fifth Avenue ran south in a clean, unbroken line. The city, as always, continued without pause. I sat with all of it. The arrest, the room, the call, the year that had led to this evening, and let it settle. Then Pemberton's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it once and said without expression, "Delphine left the building 40 minutes ago. She told the agent she needed air. She hasn't come back." I looked at him. "Drummond has flagged her passport," he said. "They think she's heading to JFK." The corridor outside the grand ballroom was quieter than I expected. A few guests moved through in small groups, coats over their arms, voices low. The evening had ended earlier than scheduled. Not abruptly, but with the particular deflation of an event that had been overtaken by something larger than its original purpose. The plaza's staff moved with practiced efficiency through the aftermath, clearing glasses, folding linens, restoring the space to its neutral state, as though the evening had been ordinary. I stood near the entrance for a moment and let the cool air of the corridor settle around me. Conrad appeared beside me. He did not say anything immediately. That was his manner. He understood that some moments required presence before they required words. "It's done," I said. "The legal part," he said carefully. "The rest takes longer." I looked at him. In the past year, I had learned to read the particular quality of what Conrad left unsaid. He was not cautioning me. He was simply being accurate the way he always was. "I know," I said. "Graves brought my coat without being asked." Rupert was already outside the car, positioned at the side entrance to avoid the remaining press that had gathered at the front. Pemberton had thought of that 2 days ago. We stood together near the side door. Conrad, Pemberton, Graves, and I, for what felt like a long time but was probably only a few minutes. The kind of minutes that carry more weight than their length suggests. Pemberton spoke first. Drummond filed the full complaint package at 11:47. The federal prosecutor's office will issue a formal statement by morning. Sterling Capital's accounts are frozen pending investigation. He paused. Derek Harlan was picked up at his meatpacking district club 2 hours ago by a separate team. The Harlan file closes the money transfer chain entirely. I absorbed that quietly. Derek Harlan, Delphine's associate, the man whose holding company had received 14 months of transfers from Sterling Capital's operational accounts. His arrest meant the financial network Prescott had built over years was now dismantled at every node. "And Delphine?" I asked. Pemberton checked his phone. A brief pause, then he looked up. "JFK, Terminal 4. She made it through check-in before the flag was activated at the gate." He set the phone down. TSA and CBP detained her at the boarding door. She's in federal custody. I thought about Delphine at the gate, her boarding pass in hand, the door open in front of her, believing for one moment that she had made it. And then the hand on her arm. The quiet, impersonal authority of people doing their jobs. The same small, precise sound that Prescott had heard an hour earlier in the grand ballroom. There was one thing I had never said out loud to anyone, not even Pemberton. The envelope in May. The FBI tip. The encrypted warning 2 nights ago. 3 separate moments where someone had given me exactly what I needed before I knew I needed it. I had my suspicions about who it was. A name that connected a hospital corridor in January to an administrative record that had been changed and then quietly flagged by someone who had been in the building both nights. I did not know for certain. I was not sure I needed to. Some debts cannot be repaid directly. You simply carry them forward and try to be the kind of person who deserves them. The low, constant tension of carrying a plan across 11 months without knowing for certain whether every piece would hold. It had held, and now it was gone, and what remained was quieter than I had expected. Conrad walked me to the side entrance. At the door, he stopped and looked at me with the particular attention he had brought to every significant moment between us since January. "Your mother used to say that the hardest part of coming home was trusting that you were allowed to stay," he said. It was the first time he had mentioned her directly. His voice was steady but only just. I think she was right. I looked at him for a moment. This man who had spent 23 years looking for a daughter he had never stopped believing was alive, who had received a stranger's blood in a hospital room and found in that accident the thing he had been searching for. "I'm staying," I said. He nodded once. Then he put his hand briefly on my shoulder, the same quiet gesture he had used on the morning of the DNA results 7 months ago in Greenwich, and stepped back inside. Rupert was waiting at the car. He opened the door without a word, and I paused before getting in. "Where to, Miss Montgomery?" he asked. I thought about the penthouse on the Upper East Side, the apartment that had been Prescott's, where I had spent 4 years of a marriage that had been a transaction from the beginning. I thought about Greenwich, the pale stone house and the snow-covered lawn, and the room that had gradually become mine. "Brooklyn," I said. "Take me to Brooklyn." Rupert held the door and did not ask which part. He had driven me long enough to know that some destinations needed to be found rather than directed. The car pulled out into the December dark, heading south. Rupert stopped the car on a quiet street just off the waterfront at 5:41 in the morning. He had not asked for an address after I said Brooklyn. He had simply driven, taking the Brooklyn Bridge across the East River while the city was still dark, and the water below held the last of the night's reflection. When I told him to stop, he pulled to the curb without comment and cut the engine. "I won't be long," I said. "I'll be here," he said. I got out and walked toward the water. Brooklyn Bridge Park in December before sunrise belongs to almost no one. The path along the waterfront was empty. The grass on either side was stiff with frost. To the north, the bridge itself rose against a sky that had begun its slow shift from black to the particular deep blue that arrives just before light. Not dawn yet, but the promise of it. Manhattan's skyline stood across the river, every window dark or lit without purpose, the city in the suspended state between one day and the next. I walked until I reached the low railing at the water's edge and stopped. According to the accident report Pemberton had retrieved from the NYPD archive, a black sedan had lost control on the street behind me 23 years ago, on a wet October night. Conrad's car. A 7-year-old girl had been found alone on the embankment, 200 meters from the impact site, disoriented with a silver bracelet on her left wrist and no identification. A patrol officer had called it in. By morning, she was in the foster care system under a name someone else had chosen. That girl had spent 23 years not knowing this place existed. I stood at the railing and looked at the water for a long time. I thought about everything the past year had required me to carry. The hospital room in January, the divorce papers on my chest, the check for $15,000 that Prescott had set on the bed edge as though it were a reasonable conclusion to 4 years of marriage. The letter with the Montgomery seal. The portrait of a 7-year-old girl in a pale blue dress. The DNA results on a printed page in a Greenwich sitting room. 3 months of learning to trust that a room could be permanent. The gala. The podium light. The sound of handcuffs in a ballroom full of witnesses. All of it had led here, to a frost-covered path at the edge of the East River in the borough, where my life had been interrupted before it had fully begun. I reached into my coat pocket and closed my hand around the bracelet. I had been carrying it loose since I left the plaza, unwilling to put it on and unwilling to leave it behind. The silver was cold from the night air. I put it on. The sky had shifted by the time I heard footsteps on the path behind me. I did not turn around immediately. I recognized the sound. Unhurried, deliberate, the particular rhythm of someone who had decided not to announce himself and trusted that he did not need to. Nathan stopped beside me at the railing and looked out at the water. "Conrad called me," he said. "He thought you might want company that wasn't obligated to be here." I looked at him. He was in a coat I hadn't seen before, his hands in his pockets, his breath visible in the cold morning air. He looked exactly as he had the night he sat across from me in the Gramercy restaurant, present without pressure, offering something without requiring it to be taken. "I'm glad you came," I said. He nodded and looked back at the water. The sun came up slowly over the rooftops of Brooklyn. The bridge above us caught the first light along its cables, a thin line of gold running the full length of the span. The river went from black to gray to something that was almost silver. Manhattan across the water emerged from the dark, one building at a time. I watched it and felt the particular stillness of someone who has reached the end of a very long road and found to their surprise that the ground beneath them is solid. I had been the girl who lost her way home at 7 years old. I had spent 23 years in rooms that were always temporary, with people who were always provisional, building a life from whatever material was available. I was still standing, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, the next chapter was mine to write. People search for stories like mine, betrayal, justice, starting over, because they've lived some version of it too. So let me be direct. I confused someone's need for me with someone's love for me. I let someone else's urgency become my obligation. I signed things I should have questioned and trusted people I should have tested first. Don't do what I did. I believe God didn't waste a single piece of what I went through. Not the hospital room, not the divorce papers, not the 23 years of not knowing where I came from. Every loss was pointing me somewhere. I just couldn't see it until I arrived. My honest opinion, the people who work hardest to make you feel small are usually the most afraid of what you'd become if you ever stopped letting them. Stop letting them. If Marin's story stayed with you, leave a comment and tell me which moment hit you hardest. Share this with someone who needs it today. And subscribe so you're here when the next story begins. Thank you for staying until the very end. That means everything. Upcoming stories contain fictional elements built for meaningful storytelling. If that's not for you, no hard feelings. But if you're staying, I think you'll find it worth it.